This video is going to be kind of focused on the idea of story in video games. And because of that, I'm not going to be really bringing in very specific games, and I'm only going to be really bringing in one very small game, very simple game called Loneliness, coming in later in the video. As for the footage you're actually watching, that would be just random video games I've kind of compiled together, and a little bit of B-roll from just different things. First and foremost, the simple fact remains that if you're going into a video game and you're making video games with the goal of creating some, quote, cinematic experience with a little bit of interactivity with it, then my friend, you aren't making a video game, you're making a movie with interactivity. And that really needs to be defined right now. Now, of course, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Let's be very frank. The Call of Duties, the Assassin's Creeds, the whatevers of the world are perfectly fine. And frankly, this is mostly on the AAA side of things, and this is where I'm going to be focusing largely. And what we really need to identify is that story and story creation in video games is incredibly and inherently different from all other media. And so, therefore, old theories of media creation, specifically movie creation, can't necessarily be applied to video games. And I want to show you this evolution coming out with this. So first and foremost, we had books and stories. And with the inherent nature of books and stories, you have to tell the reader what's happening. You have to be very in-depth about what's happening. But then we had the introduction of film and movies and TV and visual pictures, motion, combined with the ability to tell that story with a bit of narration, dialogue, etc. So the paradigm shifted from don't tell them what's going on, don't tell them that that homeless guy is hungry, show them that the homeless guy is hungry. Fully utilize the strength of the medium that you have, that being TV and film, movies. Well, now, over the past 20 years, we've entered this new medium, that being, of course, video games. And with that, we have another shift, because video games inherently are different naturally than movies, film, and TV. And by that, I mean, in books you tell them, in movies you show them, in video games you make them feel it. And by that I mean, if we follow the exact same example, with the homeless guy, in the book you will tell them that he is hungry. In the movie that you will show him, his mouth watering or his eyes stuck on some hot dog or whatever that's been left in the garbage can or whatever. In the video game, you will make the player character some homeless guy, and then you will put him in a very desolate city filled with people who care nothing about him, and force the player to then go search for food as some food meters start to slowly decrease. You make the player feel that desperation that any other homeless man in a book or movie would feel. But due to the interactivity of video games, you have that ability. And that is the major focus here. Is that due to video games and the way they work, due to the mechanics of video games, you can truly make the player feel the story that you're wanting to tell them. Furthermore, there needs to be, we need to understand fully what's happening. If we want video games to excel further than they have, if I remember correctly, they're like the most grossing industry, media industry right now. If we want them to excel in that feature, where they can outpace movies even more, if they can outpace books even more, if they can outpace music and etc., then we also need to understand that our medium allows us to specialize. Let's be very frank. Any book, any movie, hell, any set of music or narration or story can tell a story. That's fact. But storytelling in video games should merely be a bit of context. So if we took, say, the Assassin's Creed universe, the fact that you're using the Animus, the Templars, the Assassins, all of that stuff is merely meant to be a bit of context. You can still have the actual cinematic story that was in there, but the real way you make a player experience that plot, experience everything that's happening, is you make them feel it through the mechanics of the video game. And in this way, you do something that film or books could never do. And in this way, you make our own medium more unique, and therefore more specialized, and therefore it can do something that someone else can't. And that's incredibly powerful in a very capitalist economy. And the simple fact right now is that the media industries are incredibly cutthroat because it's just such a difficult thing to get into. And it's even more so within the video game space because so many people want to be developers right now. If you want to make your game stand out from others, don't simply have some story, don't simply have some set of words or dialogue or cinematic experiences. No, you make the player feel every bit of that story. And by that, I mean that you create a stage for them. You see, when you go to a play, you tend to have some kind of prologue, a bit of narration beforehand, to set the scene, to give you context as to what's happening. That is the story before, say, a mission in Call of Duty, or a mission in Halo, or a mission in any other game, for that matter. Or maybe when you're given a quest in Fallout, or Skyrim, or Dishonored. It's meant to set the scene. It's meant to be a prologue, to give you context for the situation. And then within the game, the mechanics are that stage. They are the obstacles on the stage. And the player is the actor. You see, in books, the play is described to you, almost like a radio play, for example. But then, in movies, you're simply in the audience and you're watching it. You have no control over anything. In video games, because of the context that has been given to you, because of the framework of mechanics, that being the stage and the props and any other obstacles that might be there, if there's a nail sticking up somewhere, that is what a video game is. And at the end of the day, the mundane combat to the various video games that we play, being it shooting some baddie in Call of Duty or slicing some guy in half in Skyrim or whatever, that's the actual story. When you give the movement to the player and you allow the player to interact with the mechanics, that's the story. Yeah, there isn't any dialogue or anything, but that's the point. Because, like, say, in an action scene in a movie, they display that entire action scene, but in video games, you are that action scene. You feel that action scene. You feel the desperation as you lunge for some gun in one game, or you feel that desperation as you're running from some giant beast as you have, like, no health, because in the movie you've got, like, a broken leg or something, and in this game you're literally on your last strings. That's the whole point to all of this. In video games, you can feel. By far the best example that I have found for this ability to tell a story would be a very flash game called Loneliness. Please go check out the link in my description. You guys need to play this. Because as soon as you load up the game, there is no story. You just go. And then the only story, the only context you get at the end is very, very small, and it's only at the end of the game. Now, I'm going to be silent for a bit here, pause the video, please go play it, and then we're going to discuss it really, really quick. I cannot describe this enough. Go play that game. It'll take you maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Okay. Pausing? Okay. So, the developer, at the very end of it, calls it a not game. I would disagree, actually. Now, while a lot of people within the industry, for example, Total Biscuit, one of the biggest YouTubers regarding the PC platform specifically, and a very focus on indie games, believes that you aren't really a game unless you have a failure state. And by a failure state, he means death, or you simply lose. There's the game over screen, or there's some implied failure state. For example, in, say, Skyrim or a Bethesda game, if you fail a speech check or something of that nature, that's an implied failure state. And that's his idea, is that you aren't really a video game unless there's something driving the player away from some obstacle, something driving the player to avoid it. I would, however, identify video games differently. And by that, I would say that there are degrees to video games. And on one level, you're an interactive experience. And by that I mean you simply you're essentially that movie that has a bit of interactivity with it. And then what we define games as, I would say, is there is inherent choice in it, not a focus on loneliness. The reason it is a game is because the player, as they are introduced into the mechanics in the game, begins to have choices. The player can start to try to chase down the little blocks that he begins to that begin to kind of walk away from him. He can simply go in a straight line the whole way up, just trying to finish the game, getting through the day quicker. He can try to avoid all of the blocks because he or she doesn't want to spoil the fun of all of those other dots. Or, more likely, the player simply likes people being around in the screen. And if the player tries to disrupt their little playtime, their little group, they will leave and fade into existence, leaving the player alone in this white or darkening space. And that's the entire point here, is that you have the choice, and despite that choice, you still feel the desperation. You feel the uselessness of your character. You feel the fact that, unlike so many video games, you are not superhuman. That there is no good ending. That, at the end of the day, you can't change anything, unlike so much that has been put in front of us. And in the game, you feel the futility of trying to do anything. And that's our focus here. Is that you have the choice, yet the developer made it specifically to make you feel what a kid in Korea may feel on a daily basis. Had a very clear message and symbolic value, and built his entire mechanical space around it. Now, I'm not going to deny anything. I don't know if I'd call that game fun, necessarily. And at the end of the day, when I'm buying a video game, I kind of want to have fun. I want to enjoy myself. So, of course, not every video game has to succumb to this belief that it has to be so story-focused. And frankly, if you're going to have a cinematic experience within the game, and your focus is on that story, if people buy it, who am I to really complain? But at the end of the day, if you want to truly utilize this medium, and do what nothing else can actually do, then you have to experience this. You have to make the player feel what's going on. The experience is everything. And that's the entire point. And movies, for decades, have been trying to get people to feel. What do you think horror movies are? What do you think action movies are? You got the adrenaline pumping in both of those. You got the anticipation of the monster jumping out and leaping out. What about love movies? You have the inherent emotion associated with that. You have the feeling that maybe the viewer can have that too. Maybe there's a bit of hope. Movies have been trying for decades to draw them into their worlds, to immerse them. My friends, you can't immerse someone like that because they aren't actually a part of the world. And because of that, video games can immerse someone in a world. So now I want to announce a new series, a new playlist within my YouTube channel. And we're going to be calling it The Looking Glass, and then whatever game we're actually looking at. This entire series is to try to take a video game, regardless of what the developer wanted, and we're going to be trying to take the contextual story of the video game, and we're going to be taking the mechanics of the video game, and we're going to be trying to blend them and getting some symbolic value out of it. And by that, I mean that when we take a video game, we're going to be looking at it in a very holistic way, and in that, we're going to be trying to gain some message, some value from it, that maybe there was something that the developer wanted to teach us, and that every mechanic, every word, every piece of setting, texture, everything, the aesthetic, was put in there deliberately to teach the player, to make the player feel, essentially. To make the player identify some message without actually knowing it. So we're going to be reflecting back on us and back on a game, and seeing some blemishes, seeing some different features, and maybe truly identifying what these games actually were. Now, we're making an assumption here that the developer actually cared about making some message or whatever. 9 times out of 10, the video games I'm going to be bringing up, developers probably didn't care about some overall major message with a blend in its mechanics, aesthetic, setting, and contextual story. And in this way, we're going to be bringing up a lot of maybe mundane or arbitrary elements, maybe some very gamey elements. And by that, I mean, so for example, if there's a boss ahead, a lot of developers will give you a lot of ammunition, or a lot of health, or a lot of power-ups, or whatever. Those are very gamey elements that are purely put in there for mundane or arbitrary reasons. It's 9 times out of 10 has no real bearing upon some overall symbolic message or some bullshit. But we're going to be trying to achieve some message or symbolic value from the placement of those power-ups, from the setting in there, from the boss itself, from the story and the story context surrounding the boss, everything. And because of our focus on every part of the game, no matter how mundane, no matter how arbitrary, no matter how specifically it was put in there for gamey purposes, this is going to become a very academic series, if that makes any sense. This is going to become a series that's very much focused on just kind of a mental exercise, if that makes any sense. That maybe we can have a proof of concept that even video games that weren't designed specifically with this kind of story through mechanics way, we can still glean something from it. And in this way, I think we'll have a lot of fun, because it could lead to a lot of discussion, and I'm actually kind of quite excited. I've actually already begun filming and getting footage and really proving my point regarding Fallout 4 and whatever symbolic message it may have regarding its blending of design and contextual story along with its setting, aesthetic, and every other part of its game, including the fact that it is a game. And that's the whole point of the new series. I don't know how well it's going to do, but I don't know, I'm kind of excited. And really, this entire series is meant to simply prove that there can be a story through mechanics in even AAA or very premium level games. I know for a fact that developers can do this. I know for a fact that people have done this. So, without further ado, I suppose I'll gear you all up for the very first Looking Glass video, Fallout 4. This is Shapeless Horror, signing off.